Newly released documents reveal that Correctional Services Canada stopped Paul Bernardo from having his lawyer make a statement to the media on his behalf as controversy swirled around the notorious killer's transfer to a medium security prison. In a June email, a correction service staffer wrote to the Privy Council, appearing to indicate that Bernardo's lawyer had been discouraged from making a statement on Bernardo's behalf, citing victims' considerations as the reason. A CSC spokesperson says that the agency follows a process for considering interview requests. That includes ensuring interviews do not jeopardize an offender's correctional plan or glorify their crimes. Lawyer Tim Danson represents the families of the victims, Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey, and joins us now on this. Tim, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me.
Tim, what was your reaction when you heard that this had happened?
I was a bit surprised. I mean, I must say that we don't have a problem if Bernardo wishes to communicate with his lawyer and to communicate a particular message to the public. And I say that only because whenever Bernardo speaks out on these matters, it always works against him. It militates against him. He's always Exhibit A. So for that reason and that reason alone, we don't have a problem because it's evidence that we can use at his parole hearings. But when I hear that, that Corrections Canada was doing this because it had concerns over the victims, that's a little bit difficult for us because we've brought an access to information request. It's now currently as a leave application before the Supreme Court of Canada to get the documents that Paul Bernardo himself relies upon to be relieved from the full consequences of his life sentence and his dangerous offender designation and be released on parole. And Bernardo will not consent to that on the grounds that his privacy rights outweigh the victim's rights and outweigh the public's interest in transparency. And Corrections Canada and the Parole Board and the Government of Canada sided with Paul Bernardo. So, to hear them say that we're doing this because we care about the victims is a bit rich for us. And we'll see what happens in the Supreme Court of Canada leave application, which these same parties are opposing us and the families.
Right. When it comes to what he might have said, I mean, at that point, what would he have said?
Well, I don't really know what he would say. It's interesting, and this is one of the reasons why in our access to information request, we've asked for production of the audio recording of his parole hearings and for a transcript to be made of it and for the public to actually hear him speak. Because when you actually listen to Paul Bernardo, he talks about the unspeakable crimes that he committed against Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, like normal people would talk about the weather. And so, one can only imagine what he would say. At his last parole hearing, he had, I believe it was like a 40-minute presentation. And it was, as I say, it was Exhibit A. It would just, it was just bone chilling to hear what he had to say, and more importantly, how he had to say it. So I don't know what the answer to your question is, but as a general rule, having been involved in this for many decades and been at both of his parole hearings, it really is stunning what comes out of his mouth and simply reaffirms why he should never have been transferred from maximum security to medium security, and why, as the trial judge, Associate Chief Justice Lesage said, he should spend the rest of his life behind bars.
And as you mentioned, the families did not want him transferred to a medium security facility from a maximum security facility. This ignited a political firestorm when it became news that this had happened, and the lead up to it as well, the communication, or in some instances, what appeared to be a lack of communication. One can only imagine the trauma and the impact that this might have when this case comes up over and over again for the families of the victims. You mentioned the parole hearings. In February, there's another one. How are the families feeling at this point?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting example because it's not the first time Paul Bernardo has delayed his parole hearings. It was scheduled for next month. I've been working with the families and preparing the victim impact statements. And quite frankly, it's just gut-wrenching. It brings everything back. The anguish and the despair is enormous. And then he, at his whim, decides, no, let's do it in February. So then there's a big letdown, and then they have to get worked up again in February. What's causing the families a lot of concern right now with respect to this transfer is that the Prime Minister, the Minister, other political leaders all stood up in the House of Commons, outside the House of Commons, and told Canadians how outraged they were and shocked they were by this decision to transfer Bernardo from maximum security to medium security. And then Corrections Canada does what I think is a whitewash investigation and determines that they did it all in compliance with the law. Now, whether that's true or not, and I have my own views on that as to whether they did or not, the bigger question is, let's take Corrections Canada at face value that they did it right according to the existing law. Well, when the Prime Minister and the Minister and other political leaders say this is outrageous, change the law. How can you sit back and leave the law as it is when you yourself consider it to be outrageous and unacceptable? So, I mean, that's something that's very difficult to explain to the Frenchism and the Mohafis when they ask me why. I mean, weren't these people being honest and sincere when they say they were outraged? So change the law, and the law is not even it's not even on the agenda to change the law, and that's what brings cynicism and disrespect towards our corrections parole system, and that's a shame.
Tim Danson, thank you so much for joining us on this today.
Thank you very much.